Welcome to Righting Wrongs here at Hudgell Solicitors, the easy guide to legal issues many people may have to deal with in their lives. I'm Keith Phillips, and joining me to discuss accident at work compensation claims is Senior Solicitor Mark Ellis. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Keith.
Now, you specialise in supporting clients who have suffered serious injuries as a result of health and safety failings in the workplace. Could you outline what someone who's experienced an accident at work, what they would potentially be claiming compensation for?
Yeah, somebody who's had an accident at work probably has suffered either physical or psychiatric injury. So they can claim compensation for their physical or psychiatric injuries, plus their loss of earnings, any treatment expenses. In the more serious cases, they could have claims for lifelong loss of earnings or lifelong care and assistance, plus any adaptations to transport or to their home.
And these compensation payments can be significant amounts of money, especially if they weren't able to work for a number of months or even years.
Yeah, there's no set award for having an accident at work. Each case, the value is determined by the individual set of circumstances and the individual injury plus the effect of that injury. But certainly in the more serious cases, the compensation can exceed seven figures. In the more straightforward cases, you're probably looking at a few £1,000s for very straightforward soft tissue injuries, tens of thousands for serious orthopaedic injuries. But on top of those injury awards, you tend to get the bigger heads of claim, which will be for loss of earnings over a lifetime, and that tends to lead to the higher value 6-7 figure awards where there are such things as lifelong loss of earnings.
Well, in terms of an accident at work, what would be the circumstances where someone could make a successful compensation claim?
Well, you'd be able to make a claim following an accident at work. The first thing you need to establish is that there was negligence on the part of the employer. That usually arises when they haven't provided you with a safe place of employment. That can arise from not providing you with safe systems of work, not giving you proper training. Quite often you find that it's the fault of a co-worker that's caused the accident and caused the injury. So there's a range of reasons why somebody may have an accident.
It could be even something like not being given the correct protective wear.
Yeah, that's quite a big one. So failure to provide you with the correct equipment, failure to provide you with proper training on machinery. Quite often you'll find that training is inadequate. And so whilst somebody may have had some training, it may not be sufficient training for them to use the equipment safely. We quite often find that where the insurers will argue, well, they were trained on the item of machinery, so it's their fault. But quite often, when we look carefully at the training that's being provided, it's quite often not sufficient and it's glossed over.
And many workplaces are hazardous places to be. I mean, training, it doesn't just come down to training, does it? There has to be proper safety procedures in place.
There does, yeah. Employers have a duty to provide you with a safe place of employment. That's the starting point. So if something goes wrong whilst you're at work, then there is usually reason to think that there could be a successful claim.
What if someone was partly at fault for the accident? Could they still make a claim for compensation?
Yeah, that's very possible. I mean, if somebody is partly at fault, then they're still able to make a claim. The compensation might be reduced if the court accepts that they were partly at fault. But we do see that quite often, arguments raised where the employer accepts that they had failed with their not providing proper training or proper equipment or safe place of employment. But even where an argument is raised that the person who was injured has contributed in some way to how the accident happened, it doesn't stop a claim from being successful. It just will reduce the amount that they recover.
And Mark, if someone has had an accident at work, what are their rights to make a claim for compensation?
Anybody who's been injured at work has the right to make a claim, because their employer has a duty to provide a safe place of employment. And if the accident's been caused or partly caused by the employer's negligence, then they are entitled to make that claim, to recover their loss of earnings, to recover an amount for their injury, and to try and put them back in the place that they were in as best as a settlement can do before the accident happened.
And what are the first steps to making a legal claim?
Well, the first, probably most important step is to seek some legal advice from a specialist firm. The first thing I tend to do when I meet a new client is talk to them or the family about the importance of some evidence from the accident being retained and kept. So firstly, the accidents are usually reported into an accident report book. Obviously, there are anyone who's taken to hospital, there'll be a record there of the initial injuries, but quite importantly, it's getting names of people who might have seen what happened, any video evidence of an accident taking place. That is becoming more prominent these days, with more and more places having cameras. It's really important that we try to investigate what happened right from the outset. We quite often advise the clients in relation to what we can do immediately for them in terms of rehabilitation and interim payments, and at the same time we'll work hard to investigate the accident itself, because we need to obviously prove that the employer was at fault for the claim to succeed.
So if someone's had an accident at work, report it at work, make sure it's in the accident logbook, start to gather evidence, and importantly as well, you've sought medical treatment, so it's been recorded on your medical records. But if you've had a serious accident and you're in hospital at home and you're incapacitated, can someone do this on your behalf?
Yeah, certainly. I quite often meet families whilst the person who's seriously injured is in hospital and unable to provide me with instructions. It's quite usual to start the claim off in that way, and then when the injured person is able to provide instructions, then we obviously deal with them moving forwards. But it's very often in the more serious cases an approach of dealing with the family because they're going to be obviously concerned about things like finances and lost earnings, and we can work hard at the outset to work with the insurer to try and negotiate an interim payment, but also more importantly as well, rehabilitation for when the injured person gets discharged from hospital. What we try and do and what we want to do is maximise their potential for recovery, and the earlier people can get specialist, usually private rehabilitation, the better. So we do work with insurers on the higher value cases to ensure that happens.
And Mark, for people who've had an accident at work or for their families, that's why it's important you seek specialist legal advice. A law firm that specialises in accident at work claims.
Yeah, I think that's true. We've certainly, in my experience, I've taken over cases from other solicitors who maybe weren't specialists and haven't taken the steps that probably ideally should have been taken to secure evidence at the start about what happened and to maximise the claim with the instruction of the right experts. So it is important to seek advice from a specialist firm. I would agree with that.
Well, Mark, you've had many years of experience of securing financial settlements and rehabilitation packages for your clients. These things don't necessarily happen overnight, though. What are the timescales for compensation awards?
Yeah, that's quite often one of the first questions that I get asked by a client. The more straightforward the accident, the less serious the injuries, you'll usually be able to resolve those types of claims within around 12 months. Obviously, the more serious the injuries, the longer it is going to take, because we really shouldn't be settling a seriously injured person's claim until we know what the prognosis is for the rest of their life as a result of their injury. And that can quite often take 2-3 years to find out what that prognosis is. So They can range from probably 2, 3, 4 years maybe to resolve, but obviously we want our clients to recover the maximum level of compensation, and if that does mean pushing on because an insufficient offer's been made, then that's what we will advise. But along the way, it is important to stress that even though a case can take a long time, it's possible to negotiate interim payments or make an application to the court to secure an interim payment, because obviously if somebody is not able to work, that is important to them.
And these interim payments, these are payments which come early. They can be quite significant.
They can be, yeah. Usually they'll be designed to cover a person's loss of earnings, for example. Probably we'll be looking to secure interim payments probably a couple of times a year, but at a significant level, which allows the client to feel as though they're not having to worry about finances. But equally, the insurers don't tend to offer very significant interim payments unless it's justified. So, for example, a treatment package or accommodation costs, they'll tend to offer loss of earnings for a certain period and then review that to see how the injured person's getting on. But if it's in a case where somebody is almost unlikely to return to work, then insurers can often be quite reasonable about interim payments.
And with an accident at work compensation claim, does it always have to go to court? Will it be settled in court?
It's very rare for a case to go to court. Usually there has to be some unusual or complex element for the parties not to be able to agree a settlement. There are quite often a number of areas where the parties disagree about an element of the claim, but usually they can be negotiated. It's very, very rare for a case to go to court, but we have to prepare for that eventuality from the day one.
And you touched upon rehabilitation earlier. I mean, some workplace accidents will result in more serious injuries for some people. In those situations, what will a good law firm offer in terms of support?
Well, right from the outset, the first conversation I have with my clients centres around what happened in the accident, but what can we do for that person when they are discharged from hospital, and that centres around rehabilitation. So we would arrange for a case manager to be instructed to coordinate a specialist and funded rehabilitation package, which is designed to get that person back in a position where they can start to think about returning to employment if their injuries allow them to. But the idea of that package is that it takes away having to rely on the NHS for rehabilitation. It's usually not where it needs to be, that level, that rehabilitation. So quite often it's provided privately with a team of treatment therapists, occupational therapists, and the full package really to allow that person to make as best a recovery as they can.
Mark, if someone is listening and they've had an accident at work, or a member of their family is listening, is there a time scale for when an accident at work compensation claim can be made?
Yeah, the starting point is that somebody has 3 years to make a claim, and what we mean by that is you have to involve the court by the 3rd anniversary of the accident. That doesn't mean that the claim has to resolve within 3 years, but we have to take steps to involve the court before that 3-year point.
There are a few exceptions. One is industrial diseases.
Yeah, the time period starts to run from the date of the diagnosis of an injury which is being caused by an industrial disease. That can often take a number of years to manifest itself and come out. The other exception is people who are injured at work who are under 18. The time starts to run. For
example, apprentices.
Yeah, we are seeing a number of these are becoming more popular, so we are seeing more young people being injured at work in the workplace, and the time period starts to run for them from the 3 years after their 18th birthday.
Mark, one of the things I wanted to raise, because it is something that affects people making a claim, is some employers won't want to bring a claim against their employer. They also think they might face the sack if they make a compensation claim. They shouldn't think those things, should they?
No, you can't be sacked simply for making a compensation claim. Employees in the UK are protected by employment law, which safeguards against unfair dismissal or a breach of their employment rights. The problem can arise where somebody doesn't yet have the required time with the employer of 2 years to have those rights. But I would still say to that person that they should make a claim because if they have suffered a serious injury and are going to lose earnings, then there isn't a guarantee that the employer is going to necessarily stand by them, and they need to effectively look after themselves.
And the compensation that ultimately they could get, that's not going to come out of the company's finances?
No, most companies are insured.
They should be insured.
They should be insured, not always, but they are insured. We do find that the vast majority of accident at work claims, the employer is insured. So they won't be paying the compensation themselves. The insurance company covers the cost of the claim. There are some exceptions to that where there is a limit of indemnity on the insurance policy or an excess to pay by the employer, but usually that's reserved for the most serious, high seven-figure claims. But the starting point is that there is insurance in place to cover these claims, and people should feel that's who's going to be paying the compensation.
Thank you, Mark, for your expert advice on compensation claims for accidents at work. Mark Ellis, who specialises in supporting clients who suffered serious injuries as a result of an accident at work. Thanks for listening to Righting Wrongs. And if you need further information regarding legal advice following an accident at work, head to our website, hudgellsolicitors.co.uk.